Hi everyone, this is Dragon GGY and this is the operator Hindsight for the CNY event co-runner operator Chen the Dawnstreak. She's the second alter of our OG Chen, so let's find out what she's got back with a sword after some time with the water gun. Chen the Dawnstreak is a 6-star Arts fighter in the guard class. Trait of the archetype, deals arch damage, of course. Unlike Chen the Hollandaise, who's a Rhodes Island operator with a Yen hidden faction, Chen the Dawnstreak is instead a Yen operator with a Rhodes Island hidden faction. Fun fact it is, but doesn't really matter much in the game. Chen has the exact same tags as her old self, the older self, Nuka, and DPS. Back to being a burst damage dealer, and more interestingly, she has a new weakness damage gimmick that lets her change damage type flexibly. Like all other arts fighters, she has some degree of self-sustain capability with off-fight self-heals and dodges. Her kit brings some function-based shenanigans, but in the end, it all comes down to her unique damage based on enemy HP feature, which makes her a very effective countermeasure against enemies with high HP. She kept the buff potency of her OG self, while seeing some great damage potential against specific enemies in specific terrains. Talent 1, attack plus 13%, attack speed plus 13, 16% attack and 16 attack speed at potential 5, and attack steal weakness damage. Talent 2, when not taking damage every 7 seconds, restores a random amount of HP equal to 30 to 160% of attack, 35 to 165% at potential 3, and dodges the next physical or arts damage received. Let's talk about Talent 1 first. The attack and attack speed buffs are very standard. Attack modifiers are great with her high attack scales and multi-hits in Skill 2 and Skill 3, while attack speed can shorten her base attack interval to 1.13 seconds, 1.1 seconds at potential 5. The interesting part lies in the weakness damage. This gimmick applies to all her damage, including the Skill 3 Sword Wave. Basically, the game will pre-calculate damage both in physical and arts, and it will take the one that is about to deal higher damage. Considered in this equation is the operator's attack stats, attack scales involved, direct damage modifiers, which is not that common outside of Logo's Talent 2, and any defense or resistance ignores. On the receiving end, we have target's defense and resistance, and that's all the factors. What that means is that post-damage modifiers like anti-fragile effects, physical or arts damage increase on the damage side, or physical or arts damage reduction on the receiving end are not considered because they technically only come into play once we decided the base damage. Other than the very straightforward offensive boosts, the talent brings adaptiveness to Chen's against enemies with different defensive stats. Due to how damage calculation works in this game though, usually she'll do physical damage in buff game modes with her Giga buffed attack stat, and will likely do arts damage when it's debuffed, but there's no guaranteed or very set rules. However, it's also easy to tell that sometimes the weakness damage mechanic can lead to loss of damage. For example, it doesn't respond to type-specific damage buffs. You may have Saria Skill 3, Arts Fragile, Relics ready to go and Mega buff her arts damage, but if the game decides that, well, she should do physical damage based on her attack and enemy's defense and resistance, it's gonna do physical damage, even if it would have done higher damage the other way. Same goes for some other type-specific mechanics, for example, specific damage dodge against the Dorian alcohol lovers who have physical dodge for a period of time. The game determines that Chen would do higher damage if it's physical, but we all know that she should have dealt arts instead. This is just where a gimmick counters another gimmick. Talent 2 is a sustained talent. The minimum randomizing interval is 1%, so it could be 40%, it could be 150%. By expectation, it heals 798 each instance, so about 114 HPS. It does help with her sustain in the long run, so when she doesn't pick up enemies, she'll heal herself up over time. It's also effective against slower hitting enemies, quite similar to how Mudrock's talent work. However, it's also gonna be rendered completely useless if she takes damage all the time. Toxic Mist, DOT damage, the not taking damage timer never starts, and she'll never heal herself and never get the dodge. When it does trigger though, the guaranteed dodge can continue her no damage taken timer, and you can use that extra time to take out the enemy. The talent works okay. Skill 2 has a short invulnerability period where she's guaranteed to not take damage, so that's one guaranteed trigger. The longer reaching skill 3 could also keep enemies from her better, and that's another favorable situation for it to work. Under proper enemy aggression, this talent can make her function without healing resources, working with the decent defensive build of the archetype. Chen releases with her module Trait Update Attack Speed plus 8 when not blocking an enemy. Talent upgrade goes to Talent 2, the interval between self-heals reduced from 7 to 6 seconds. Recovery amount lower limit increased by 20% and the upper limit increased by 40%. Base effect clearly is the fitting one for Chen, since most of the time she's not blocking enemies with the skill 2 slash and the longer reaching skill 3. The 8 attack speed further reduces attack interval to 1.03 seconds. And interestingly, having this bonus plus the attack speed in Talent 1 will undo the difference between having potential 3 and not. It's just how math and the game work. Upgrades shorten the downtime between self-heals and increases the heal expectation per instance. So overall, it's a slight damage increase, usually giving one more attack during skill, while the upgrades are purely sustained improvements. That one more attack plus the attack attribute increases skill 3's auto attack damage by 13.49%, but skill 2 slashing, skill 3's sword wave damage are completely unaffected by attack speed. The upgrades increase her self-heal expectation from 798 to 1115.4. With the shorter trigger cooldown, the effective HPS increases from 114 to 185.9, which is a 63% increase. Combined with the guaranteed dodge, it allows her to counter a wider range of enemy attacks, but you know me, I'd rather they let me defeat enemies faster. Level 1 is recommended. Level 2 does give the shortened interval, but level 2 and beyond is quite optional. Skill recommendation, my take is skill 3 over skill 2 over skill 1. Skill 3 has an AoE, HP percentage base damage that can travel across the field covering distance enemies or repeatedly damaging the same target in a confined area. It comes with a minimum damage mechanic to ensure effectiveness while gaining decent range and target count. Skill 2 is a callback to her old invulnerable slash but with a new twist. It's still both potent, doesn't waste on mobs, and instead is very good at clearing them out in a very dramatic fashion. However, the new move mechanic may present some unintended troubles in practice. Skill 1 is just a showcase of the archetype's long-running problems. Short-handed, single target, the silence gimmick doesn't really help. It just doesn't show practical value, especially with skill 3 available with a similar cycle. Skill 1, attack plus 120%, attacks hit twice, and attacks silence the target until the skill ends. This is a 10/20, 18-second skill. The cycle is very comfortable, DPH is okay, DPS is okay. It eventually still comes down to how primitive the skill is in 2026. The skill, of course, pays tribute to the OG Chen as a dual-hit Swordmaster. But in other words, it returns to the short-handed, single-target nature of arts fighters, which we have criticized over and over when we discuss BaoUner and Vina. Attack silence, which is a viable low-effort countermeasure that comes in handy from time to time, and can last until the skill ends, but still, it's hindered by the lack of reach and multi-target. The making of this skill doesn't help to extend the coverage. Again, the cycle is pretty decent, but so are the other two skills. So honestly, this skill is too old-fashioned, and there are zero reason to use it over skill 3. Skill 2 slashes the nearest enemy 10 times. Each slash deals 480% attack as art damage. If the target is defeated, retargets to the nearest target and adds +1 to remaining slash count. Once all slashes end, if the current target has not been defeated and is on a deployable tile, move to set tile and otherwise return to starting tile. Afterward, attack plus 300% and gains 60% physical and arch dodge. This is a 15/20 6-second skill. The 6 seconds is the duration where she gets the plus 300% attack, not the slash duration, which is not fixed. The slash targeting range is the same as the OG Chen skill 3 Diamond, and each slash deals 4.78k damage for a total of 47k. She deals 3.57k per attack post slash up to only 5 attacks. Let's talk about its mechanics. There's a 0.4 second interval between slashes, which is twice as long compared to the old counterpart. But it makes sense because you want to give her more time to catch enemies coming up so that she jumps to another upon elimination. She's still invulnerable during slashes, which helps to trigger talent 2 at least once. It can target aerial enemies, which is another welcome optimization from before. After defeating a target, Chen will prioritize finding another target within the 1.7 tile radius of them. If there isn't any, she can also find target in her skill range where she starts off. The slash will end if there are no targets in either of the ranges. Chen will always perform the move action even without actually changing her position, which is the same pattern as Alpiana skill 3. You should know by now that moving is a redeploying action, so she'll remove any buff or debuff on her afterwards. What's unlike Alpiana skill 3 though is that she'll stay at her new position if she moves and doesn't come back after the skill ends. So how do you use this skill? First of all, you can use it to perform some flashy mob disposal. It theoretically can go on forever if you have enough targets and they can be defeated in one slash. Targets serve as jump pads and allow her to jump from one to another and reach across the map. You can also do the good old buff and kill just like how you work with any burst skills. The attack scale in this skill is massive enough, each slash hits 50% harder than her old self and can easily nuke enemies with buffs. For a reference, the slash damage after being buffed by Warfarin skill 2 is 84.8 thousand, higher than the 74.3 thousand of Dagonbrash's skill 3. It also has a very fast cycle at 20 SP cooldown despite having a longer cast time. But in my opinion, the limitations or even flaws of this skill is low-key quite disturbing. It's single target when compared to Narantuya and Dagonbrash's skill 3. That isn't a big case, because Ray and Nexial Altar will also single target. The big problem lies in the forced move. I genuinely have no idea what they were thinking when they put it in. You do not have an option to have her come back instead of moving out. Oftentimes, you'll see her just move away from where you want her, move away from her healing resources, and either go AWOL from her lane holding or die miserably after jumping into the heap of enemies. If you have her kill enemies with multiple phases, she'll jump out, and because finishing one phase isn't technically defeating an enemy, she'll just stay with the enemy and potentially get murdered during their invulnerability between phases. This behavior is very frustrating in practice. There's no practical way to predict whether or not she'll come back after a skill. The uncertainty compromises the experience massively. The post-slash phase is also quite questionable in my opinion. I know it's for finishing enemies, but it's just too short to make enough impact, especially when I know that I'm already half screwed if she jumps out in the first place. Overall, I really wouldn't hype up this skill too much. Skill 3 is a versatile option and skill 2 in comparison is in a much nicher place. Its damage is good, being invulnerable while dealing damage is good, its burst is good, but the consequence of an unintended move could be unbearable. So at least from a damage perspective, this skill would have a lower priority than skill 3. Skill 3 on skill activation unleashes a sword wave that travels forward and can change direction, dealing arch damage to enemies it passes through equals 6% of their current HP, minimum of 580% attack as arch damage. Attack range expands into the Lord base range. Each attack deals 3 instances of 210% attack as arch damage to up to 4 ground enemies. This is a 18/25 20-second skill. The minimum DPH for the sword wave is 5,772.6. Chen herself deals triple hits of 2,090 DPH. So without even considering the sword wave damage, this is a 4-target skill with a relatively long reach that can deal almost 120k damage in 20 seconds at 5,956 DPS. And that for an arts fighter is definitely a great start. Now let's go through the mechanics. First of all, about how the sword wave moves. It can deal damage to aerial enemies, which her auto attacks cannot, unfortunately. The wave has a hitbox of 1.3 radius and moves at 1.5 tiles per second. It only deals 1 instance of damage to each enemy before the next turn. It will always turn clockwise by 90 degrees, in other words turning to its right hand side. The collision radius is 0.25 tile to the edges, and it will turn when hitting specifically the red box, the blue box, and range tiles. So any low ground structures like fences, holes, portals will not make it turn. So do always take a few seconds to determine how the sword wave's gonna go. If it's not how you like, you may wanna try somewhere else. Next, let's talk about its damage. The HP percentage damage is based on the current HP of targets, meaning that the damage is gonna gradually reduce. Of course, it comes with a minimum damage to guarantee its effectiveness, but this is not the same mechanics as Intellectual Skill 3 or Red's talent. It's not guaranteed to deal at least that damage. Instead, its mechanic is that the game will choose the bigger number between 6% of target HP and 580% of attack, and register that number as the to be dealt damage. Then it's gonna go through defense or resistance, instead of guaranteeing to deal that damage regardless of enemies' defensive stats and damage reductions, which honestly would be too OP. Knowing that, it's easy to calculate that against enemies with specifically less than 96,210 HP, the minimum damage would be dealt instead. And fun fact, there are less than 20 enemies in this game that are not bosses and have more than 100k HP. Most of the high HP enemies are found in IS and RA, so in a lot of situations, the sword wave is just an AoE attack that deals 5.7k damage. But in no way am I saying that the sword wave doesn't matter, because on the other hand, it can rely on terrains to do crazy amounts of damage. And the first tip for using this skill is utilizing terrain. The general rule is that you want to find optimal terrains. It can be a corner, a narrow pathway, where on skill, Chen unleashes the sword wave, that's 1 tick. If there's a corner for it to quickly turn twice, that will be 3 ticks in the blink of an eye. What it does is that it front loads the damage that Chen can do against a target. For a low HP enemy, 3 ticks will do 17k damage, enough to eliminate most mobs. For a high HP enemy, let's say 500k HP, 3 ticks do 84,000 damage, and that's how the skill does burst damage. In the most optimal scenario, you'll find narrow terrains that confine the sword wave and have it turn around frequently, so that more damage triggers are possible. If you manage to build a 1x1 enclosure, it can deal up to 62 instances of damage, and that's 357.9 thousand damage at minimum. You also get 30 and 21 triggers in 2x1 and 2x2 boxes respectively, bringing like double, triple of just the auto attack total damage. Generally, you can refer to the diagram here. The best case scenario is that you have a close by turning point ahead and to the right when the sword wave is traveling. But in practice, being in a one-tile narrow pathway is already a good start. You can facilitate a perfect prison by using RA high grounds, nasty skill 3 tiles to create artificial turning points if you are willing to go through the setups. In more open maps, you can use the sword wave to strike across the map if you pre-plan where Chen is and how the sword wave's gonna go. Again, it deals 2 instances of damage very fast around turning points, and the damage is enough to get rid of most weaker enemies. So really, the skill has quite the standout advantages. First of all, very importantly, you are looking at a 100,000 damage level skill without considering the sword wave cycles at 25 SP with a 7 SP startup. Usually I'd say that's a cycle power creep, but then I remember it's for an arts fighter. Speaking of which, the skill also extends the attack range and attack count to better negate the archetype's base disadvantages. The skill is very punishing against high HP enemies even with just a few ticks. The damage she can do against those targets in a couple seconds may cost much more effort if it's to be done by any others. Her potential when the terrain condition allows is terrifying to think about, and still, massive attack scales, triple hits, the skill scales even more with buffs. It's very evident when you play IS. So in summary, Chen the Dawnstreak is an adaptive damage dealer who's very good with buffs, has good skill cycling, and a unique HP-based damage potential. Her weakness damage feature improves her damage effectiveness in different environments. The self-sustain is serviceable if the threat is about moderate. Her fast cycling, increased effective range, and target count addresses 3 major odds fighter weaknesses that we pointed out in the past, which makes her use experience much more better than the odds fighter that came before her. And unlike traditional odds fighter who go with high attack modifiers, Chen's kit packs attack scales instead, as if she was still the old sword master, making her buff potent just like the old times. And at the end of the day, she has her unique gimmick, a skill whose potential is dependent on both enemies' HP and the terrain. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. For limitations, she still lacks the block count when it's needed, but from experience I can say it's much better than what Viviana and Vina has to work with. She can consistently deal with aerial enemies, especially when they tend to fly out in the open, while skill 3 Sword Wave would prefer narrow spaces better. Also, adaptive damage type is a really cool concept, but it's still crashing into a hard wall against damage reductions, especially if they go both ways. So in terms of damage quality, she's slightly below operators with defense or resistance ignore like Wang, and definitely another level below the true NE damage dealers. In daily, she's a viable and easy to use option, but also just among the many options you could have interchangeably. For new players, she's much weaker before E2, weakness damage helps her deal with enemies relatively better, but doesn't make her just stand out. There's no multi-targeting, skill 2 does a lot less damage. If it doesn't kill efficiently, it's not as effective against mobs. Not to mention that all the unintended moves that she may pull off, so not a priority. She's not AFK at all. I guess skill 3 Sword Wave flying across the map kinda saves you some hustle dealing with distance enemies, but that doesn't happen in every map, so eventually her appeal goes mainly to veteran players. The adaptive damage means that she can perform against most enemies, and you can be less concerned when going in blind. If you're willing to spend the effort setting up a kill box for terrain-dependent shenanigans, give her the buffs, she'll bring solid results. Overall, she deals good damage but doesn't break the ceiling of your damage character lineups, considering that enemies in daily content have pretty reasonable HP numbers. In advanced, her on-paper numbers are promising, and she is indeed performing in various hardcore contents. In IS, like we said, she scales massively with buffs, similar to how Sakiko does, maybe to a lesser extent, but then Chen has much better multi-target capability. In higher difficulties, her skill 3 Sword Wave can quickly cut down the HP of bosses. This is where we could be looking at million levels of HP. For example, in difficulty 18 of IS6 ending 4, the whole boss has 19 million HP, meaning that the Sword Wave will do up to 1 million-ish damage on the first trigger. However, it's not like she's super dominant, as at the end of the day, her full potential is still dependent on terrain. That said, she's still among the top pick guards towards the end of IS6. And right now, in IS7, there are more great terrains for Chen to work with. There are even better matching relics that she can benefit from, like the one that increases the first instance of damage dealt to an enemy by 3 times. And the Sword Wave just obliterates everything it touches. Not to mention that there are natural kill boxes available in stages. The now powerful Defender Supporter Squad also makes building a box in with nasty skill 3 a practical strat. In Stronghold Protocol Alliance, she's viable as a yen damage dealer selection. The long-reaching AoE damage with skill 3 is pretty strong, but the Yen Alliance is also pretty good midway towards the boss fight already. The usual strat for building up to power for the boss fight is stacking Agile or the Neo Arcane. I don't know if it's gonna be translated that way. The Arcane Alliance, which boosts arch damage. But as the Yen Alliance stack up, the high attack bonus is likely gonna change Chen's damage to physical. The boss arena is also terrible for the Sword Wave's movement, so she's not super dominant. In RA, you can build up kill boxes with artificial high ground tiles and have Chen evaporate bosses with millions of HP in one go. In debuff game modes, her HP based damage has its potential like KOB's defense based damage, however, she's also more dependent on terrain. And for the last 2 CCBs, damage reduction risks are introduced instead of more defense, resistance, and max HP buffs for enemies. and that has not been a good news for her, as they quite weaken her unique advantages with the weakness damage gimmick and the Sword Wave's HP based damage. And at the end of the day, having adaptive damage still isn't as close as a solution compared to E damage dealers, like the Trigodia Mantra combo who gets the crown in the CCB 5. Anyway, that's gonna be it for this episode. Thank you all for watching until the end. I'll work on the module update real quick, so stay tuned for that, and I'll see you in that video then. Bye bye.